Hello and welcome to Book Splash on Splash FM 105.5 Ibadan. This is another moment for writers and book lovers to gather and enjoy reading. I am Michael Olatunbosun. Today we have before us a broadcast journalist's recollection of a sterling career and a book for both professional media practitioners and the general reading public. The book is titled Dotun Oyelade Reporting, Memoirs of a Newshound, written by Prince Dotun Oyelade and published in 2022 by Current Incorporated. Prince Dotun Oyelade is a media professional and great broadcast journalist of repute. He was private secretary to Governor Lam Adesina from 1999 to 2003 and special advisor public communications to Adebayo Alao Akala between 2007 and 2011. He worked as a reporter at NTV, now NTA Ibadan, and later went to Television Service of Oyo State, TSOS, where he was foundation staff in 1982. He is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Broadcasting Corporation of Oyo State, a role which he held in 2001 during the Lam Adesina administration. In the preface to the book, the author sets the agenda for the reader. He writes that the book should serve the purpose of encouraging broadcast journalists and those aspiring to be to further improve their trade by learning from the little efforts of reporters like me and using them as a fillip to excel in their chosen profession. This book is equally targeted at broadcast media practitioners in the practical excursion of their assignments. So, from the words in the preface, we begin to encounter reporter and journalist Dotun Oyelade in his elements and a scintillating voyage through the exemplary career of a super reporter and media mogul. In the first chapter, titled Encounter with the General, the author here recalls his experience with General Olusegun Obasanjo during a 1978 commissioning ceremony in Ondo, and this episode, in his unique career as a television reporter, immediately throws up one of the hazards of the media profession. So after the commissioning, he reports that his attempt to conduct an ambush interview with the head of state earned him some beating from the general's orderly. However, his rescue by the ADC to the head of state made sure that the job got done that day. In the second chapter, the author recalls with deep nostalgia his interview experience at NTA Ibadan, then NTV, in 1977, when he applied for and got employed as a reporter. He gives us a thorough rundown of the personalities who grilled him for the job, under the leadership of the general manager, Dr. Yemi Farombi, whom he describes as a wise and highly respected druid. Later on, the author gives us a list of the highly eclectic team that he worked with, including especially the camaraderie and team spirit that pervaded the work environment then. Of course, this is the typical spirit that dominates most newsrooms and broadcast stations even today. Soon after, the author feeds us with the juicy details of some of his field experience as a reporter reputed for his stand-uppers. Of his numerous reportorial encounters, Prince Dotun Oyelade here treats us to the nitty-gritty of his reportage of the Ali Must Go protests that greeted the hike in school fees imposed on tertiary institutions across the nation by the Olusegun Obasanjo military regime. In this book's third chapter, the author gives an account of his early days at TSOS. Earlier, we read about the intrigues that occasioned the distrust between the staff and management of NTV Ibadan and NTA Lagos, and the failure of the parties to agree on the coverage of a scandal about the nation's oil company. So, some of the staff at Ibadan had to leave the station after having gone to court with the powers that be at NTA. So it was natural for some of them to find themselves at TSOS in its early days. So the author informs the reader that he and others, despite having been household names on the strength of their exploits as reporters at NTV Ibadan, TSOS, under the able leadership of Dr. Yemi Farombi, once again, will still go ahead with a rigorous recruitment process for them. But as expected, Dotun Oyelade distinguished himself. And what follows is a recollection of his reportorial exploits as a reporter at the Broadcasting Corporation of Oyo State. A striking start point is the author's reportage of the trials of Lawrence Anini, the notorious robbery kingpin who terrorized Benin City and environs in the mid-80s. The author recalls that at some point during his coverage of the Anini trial in Benin, he had become well known by the judge, the commissioner of police, and even Lawrence Anini himself, to the extent that Anini was granting him more interviews than he did with the other reporters. The author gives us a recap of the trial of Mamman Vatsa and others implicated in the failed coup to displace the Ibrahim Babangida military junta in 1986, and particularly beams his light on Mamman Vatsa, the alleged leader of the coup, and Major Daniel Idowu Bamidele giving us a slice of his near-depression bout after consistently listening to Bamidele's pleas during that trial period. Included in the narratives of the mercurial reportorial chest of the author is his coverage of the inferno that engulfed the Cocoa House, Ibadan, on 9 January 1985. Described as the first known skyscraper in tropical Africa, the 24-story building had been struck by an 18th-floor fire, and the BCOS team, led by the author, quickly headed to the scene. You're listening to Book Splash on Splash FM 105.5 Ibadan, and I'm discussing the book Dotun Oyelade Reporting, Memoirs of a Newshound, written by Prince Dotun Oyelade. In this book, one of the most daring reportorial assignments of Dotun Oyelade was when he went to Ikenne on hearing about the death of Chief Obafemi Awolowo, former premier of the Western region. As a reporter with a knack for the news behind the news, the unique and the special, Dotun Oyelade reports that he meandered through tens of somber-looking faces as his nose for something special and unusual led him to the bathroom of Awolowo, where he fetched his angle to the story. Next in line comes the author's rendition of his reportage of the death of Dele Giwa, pioneer editor-in-chief and co-founder of Newswatch, whose birth in January of 1985 the author describes as the beginning of real investigative journalism in Nigeria. The author writes that, I quote, Newswatch was deemed too hot for the authorities to handle, digging deep in its investigations and information gathering, and publishing without fear, such that it became quite a pain in the neck of the Buhari administration and the Babangida government that came afterwards. End of quote. In this book, Prince Dotun Oyelade writes about the tricky matter of political influence on the media. He hints about the tendency of pressing political tendencies to influence professionalism and drown the voice of the people. In the light of this, the author makes reference to the 3 months during which the Olunloyo government dealt with the personnel of the Television Service of Oyo State, TSOS, having perceived the station as pro-UPN and anti-NPN, the ruling party at the center the previous years. In this 5th chapter of the book, titled The Olunloyo Story and the Exit from BCOS, the author here provides big indictments on the person and government of Dr. Omololu Olunloyo. The 3 months of Olunloyo's government before the military incursion were described as quote-unquote dreadful, and quote again, as some were summarily dismissed from work the very day the governor was sworn in, while others were deployed to the state secretariat at Agodi for months to pine away in deliberately induced idleness. I was one of those left to rot in the conference room of the head of service. End of quote. But has anything changed today? That's the question, isn't it? You're listening to Book Splash on Splash FM. I'm discussing the book Dotun Oyelade Reporting, Memoirs of a Newshound. In the book, the author recalls his international exchange program in the United States and how he almost stayed back to work at some of the media houses that made advances to have him. Then the author gives us glimpses of his foray into the print and publishing world. Thus, he gives us a rundown of important milestones in his trade as a writer, biographer, and chief executive of a publishing company. Consequently, we read here about his work on Chief Adeseun Ogundoyin, His Royal Majesty and the late Seun of Ogbomoso land, Oba Oladunni Jimoh Oyewumi Ajagungbade III, Governor Adebayo Alao Akala, former Chief of Defense Staff, Air Chief Marshal Alex Sabundu Bade, and Chief Emeka Ojukwu, among others, including the intrigues leading to the publication of those books. In fact, I strongly recommend that members of the public, particularly media practitioners and especially broadcast journalists, should read this book to catch the background stories leading to his writing of those books. One of the key elements of the book is the injection of the author's reportorial verve and vast experience as a reporter on the field and difficult terrain to enlighten the broadcast professionals of today. For instance, the author adds a chapter which references a textbook titled The Broadcast Journalist, previously written by the author. And the final part of the book is a collection of testimonials and eulogies about Prince Dotun Oyelade by people who work with him, those whose path and his crossed professionally, including other well-wishers. It also has a section in which his great family, wife and children share their thoughts, fond moments, and so on about the author. Ultimately, the book Dotun Oyelade Reporting, Memoirs of a Newshound, is a well-written, well-illustrated, no-holds-barred work. The author's dexterity with the English language is powerfully on display here. The book is a must-read for all lovers of books. Now let's meet my guest, the author. In this conversation, Prince Dotun Oyelade talks about his career as a reporter, his professional trajectory, and thoughts on some other issues, particularly about journalism as a profession. The book is titled Dotun Oyelade Reporting, Memoirs of a Newshound. Prince Dotun Oyelade is here with me. Welcome to Booksplash, sir.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm happy to be here.
You waited till you were 70 to bring out memoirs about your professional exploit. Tell us why.
Well, there are a number of reasons that can be adduced for the timing. The first one is in respect to a literary work by Shakespeare. Shakespeare says, "There is a time in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to success." Now, you can take that as a reason for my choosing my 70th birthday to so do. Do not forget that I've been authoring books since 1995. My first work of art was a book I wrote on, incidentally, the industry itself.
Broadcast journalism.
Broadcast journalism. Way back then, the book still sells in trickles till today. After that, of course, I've written 9 books before now. But, as I said in the book, writing a book on myself can be a treacherous part because I've been fully involved in my profession since the age of 24, and I've equally been fully involved in politics since 1991-92. So you see, and of course, I've had the privilege of serving quite a number of governors in the state, starting, of course, with Uncle Lamadi Shino, who is my political mentor and veritable uncle. I'm from Ugbomoso, he's from Ibadan, but we met and we gelled and we had mutual respect for one another. I just came back from holiday and his first son, Ayobami Lamadi Shino, who is a medical doctor in England, visited me. And of course, we've been chummy ever since I got to know his dad. Equally, you are aware that I served my schoolmate, Otumba Alawakala, and nowadays. So, and I've always been at the corridor of power, so to say. So, being a reporter, I can't wait to regurgitate some of these political experiences, hands-on, which I had. I can't wait. But that must have to be at the fullness of time. To me, my judgment tells me that I must first and foremost write about my professional experience, which, if you ask me to take either of them, of course, I'll pick journalism.
Which was why you stated in your preface here that the objective of this book should be to serve the purpose of encouraging broadcast journalists and those aspiring to further improve their trade by learning from the little efforts of reporters like me and using them as a fillip to excel in their chosen profession. In other words, this book is for people like us.
Yes.
And for those who are coming behind.
Those who are before you.
And I see that it's a very rare kind of book, really, for broadcast journalists, people who have excelled, who had, more like a mercurial, career in the industry to write like this. You chose to give us a bit of your professional life in this book because for me it's a bit. You have a career that spanned over 40 years.
Yeah.
And that means that there's still more to come. But I'm tempted to ask the question. You also have a very brimming career in politics.
I do.
You started by writing this one. There's something in it that you've not told us. What is that thing?
In politics?
Yes.
Oh, you have a labyrinth of information. that I've not told anybody. And that was why I said, veritably, I had been in the corridor of power. I mean, I saw where decisions are taken. I saw reasons for taking them. I saw the flaws, the personality flaws. I saw the societal flaws. With due humility, I saw everything. You know, not because you are superhuman, but if you have been an investigative reporter from your early 20s, you can't but have the knack for looking at the nuances of developments, political developments. So, and I was very, very sensitive to it. I equally have my eyes on the ball. I equally have my ears to the ground. So I was able to see those where I wasn't present. I was able to educatedly put two and two together and ask questions. And usually they are right, with humility. So to answer your question, I think I have a load full in my pocket.
So we should wait for that one very soon.
By the special grace of God.
All right. I know you are a very powerful writer, but let's go to the profession now. You wrote about your recruitment exercise experience at NTV, now NTA in Ibadan here. And you also wrote about how you crossed from there to TSOS, now BCOS. Yeah. I want to interrogate the issue about the recruitment process. I practice in the industry, but the question is, that kind of rigorous recruitment, you rarely find them today, particularly with the proliferation of media houses.
No, you
don't. How do you feel with this kind of knowledge that you have now?
I'm not a fan of those who are nostalgic about the good old days, because I believe that if you are truly an achiever and a success in life, you don't really have to make constant references to the past before you fulfill yourself today. So I am always very careful to compare both, because the circumstances are great. I mean, they greatly differ, you see, and you may not be very fair in your analysis if you have to draw a sharp contradistinction between the past and the new. As I said, the circumstances may be different, and they usually are. But in the case of our experience at Agodi, we came in April 6, 1977. And in the book, I listed those of our bosses who were present when we were being interviewed. We had stories. We knew many people, brilliant, but who could not make it. In our set, only myself, Tayo Balogun, who was an editor with NTA, and Lolu Akingbola has relocated maybe some 30 years ago to the US. We were the only three who were successful. So it was rigorous, to say the least. I mean, when your potential ogas will want to outsmart you, destabilize you, by asking you really, really exotic and strange, outlandish questions, just so they can find out your depth. Luckily for me, my father, an educationist, I started reading newspapers since 1962 when I was in primary 4 and when I was 10 years old. Okay? So, the Daily Times, the Morning Post, then later, about that time, the broadsheet Daily Sketch came forth too. Wow. Well, of course, the Tribune was 1949, so it was always in our library too. And in any case, I was making very good use of the public library in Ogbomoso. So much so, I was a constant visitor that I can tell you that Mr. Adeosun from a town in Osun State was the librarian. So that's to tell you, and you know how many years we're talking about? You're talking about 60 years ago. We had the passion for education. Way back then, I knew who the Prime Minister of Ceylon was, a woman called Bandara Naike. I mean, I just gave you that example to tell you the depth of our worldwide knowledge. In the primary school, I was called Histo for historian, because I loved civics. was instead of social studies.
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
it was civics those days. So, and in any case, my mom and her aunties and my eldest sister, they all had a song for me. They would say, "This is Akoni Broadcasting Service." That, I mean, whereas it's a parody of this is the Nigeria Broadcasting. So way back, I knew I was going to be a journalist. And by the time I was 20, I did my first publication pullout in form of an interview with Sam Opone, and it was used by a gentleman called Jide Orimogunje, who was the sports editor of the Daily Sketch at the time. So, the human memory is far superior to the computer. You can see me regurgitating some of these things. So that's why that this book is incomplete, because when I couldn't intervene with it anymore, when the book got to deadline stage and I couldn't add anything else, now a torrent of reminiscences started coming in that are probably far more shattering and more powerful than this. But that's life.
So we should expect something, maybe a sequel or something.
Between you and I, don't be surprised.
My deduction is you have a very sharp mind.
Oh, well,
And,
thank you. Pining away.
You rejected the tag veteran journalists vehemently in this work. I'd like to read somewhere here. You said, if you do not refer to old practitioners of medicine, engineering, surveying, law, etc. as veterans, even after practicing for over 40 years and above, why should older journalists be tagged veterans and revel in it? I reject the title with all the force I can garner. That's the extent to which you could go in this tag. But a lot of people enjoy to be described as veteran journalists.
Oh, yeah. No, different strokes, you see. But if God spares my life, I like to still be very relevant in the active mode of journalism up to the age of 90 or beyond. Everything depending on my faculty. If amnesia has not come my way, and if I still have, but we should not limit our bars. We do that a lot. You think that if you spend 20, 25 years, then or the next thing to do is to gloat over a bottle of beer and tell and revel in the tales of when we were. No. The good old days is now.
It speaks to the welfare package of journalists. A lot of journalists today are not, getting paid, particularly for the print. It's even worse for the print.
Absolutely.
What can we do about this profession, really?
I'm short of words, because when you begin to look at the issue from that perspective, you find out that you may be unfair to tag journalists for what they are, generally speaking. Don't forget that I equally said in the book that there are thousands of brilliant journalists who are pride to the profession, holding their own all over the world.
You wrote about persons as well. You wrote about the camaraderie that, existed in the industry. When you came in, you mentioned names. In fact, this book is more like a testimonial, your testimonial about colleagues in the job, and particularly for those who managed you. You talked about Dr. Yemi Farombi very beautifully in this work. You described him as a druid. I was wondering, and I'm looking at his book on your table in this office as well. You must have such profound respect for Dr. Yemi Farombi.
Oh, definitely, yes. What makes him, the gentleman, what makes him far more unique, apart from his innate and residual brilliance, which cannot be hidden, is accessibility. He represents a man who does not take himself for granted and who sees life as a very simple place to orbit. He has no airs at all. Invite him to anywhere in the whole, he'll find his way there. That's the kind of man. And, it's not for lack of anything to do. He respects people and he naturally loves people. So that's the uniqueness of him. That's why he's someone I do not like I love so much.
Wow.
And you also mentioned, your brushes with the Omololu Oluloyo government. And that episode continues to ring.
Don't get me into trouble
mind.
in Ibadan, please.
But has anything changed today when a new government comes? The new government naturally sees journalists or media houses as praise singers of previous administration or the opposition. It happens till today. And,
It does.
in our history in this country, you had, journalists being, incarcerated. In some cases, they are being redeployed to other places because governments thought that they were threats to their own administrations. These things still happen today.
Yes, it does. And I'm afraid it will continue to happen. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Some government leaders see themselves as people who can do no wrong. The best way to govern is to pretend to be a fool. You know something? Yet you ask around and even give the people the impression that it was their idea in the first place. What's wrong with humility? Skirmishes between Dotun Oyelade and our father, Chief Omololu, will always happen. But we became quite attached to one another after that. But the beauty of it is we never referred to those episodes, even in our interactions. So, leaders will always be leaders.
Finally, you are the chief executive officer of a very big media organization, BCOS.
Yeah.
How has it been for you managing this kind of organization?
Well, coming to BCOS is not for the first time. Mm-hmm. I was the chief executive officer here way back in 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I had worked here between 1982 up till the time it was merged together with the radio arm until 1988 when I voluntarily left. So I know the BCOS inside and outside. And you will see that during the launching of my book, my birthday, what Governor Seyi Makinde said, that he made no mistake by putting us here. Well, I'm gratified by that public statement and all that he said that day. But I think if you ask me, the Broadcasting Corporation of Oyo State has been the better for it, even if I say it myself.
Prince Dotun Oyelade is the author behind the Memoirs. Dotun Oyelade reporting, Memoirs of a Newshound. Thank you for your time, sir.
My pleasure, anytime.
That was my conversation with Prince Dotun Oyelade, the author of the book Dotun Oyelade Reporting, Memoirs of a Newshound. I hope you loved it. If you did, please join me for another time out on Book Splash, same time next Saturday on Splash FM 105.5 Ibadan. I thank you for listening. In case you have a comment or query, please send a text message to 0805-699-8676 or email olatunbosun@splashfm1055.com. You can follow me on Twitter at MikeTunbosun. My sound manager is Victor Daudu, and I'm Michael Olatunbosun. I urge you to read the book today.